Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Double Eight Entertainment. Please forgive me for the hiatus, but today we're starting off strong. I'm actually going to be shooting two videos back to back, so don't mind me dressing up in the same attire. But for today's video, we'll be tackling one of my personal favorite subjects, literature. And not just any literature, disturbing literature. So for today, I will be recommending 15 incredibly disturbing novels and short stories. At number 1, The Blessed Affliction. I'd like to start off by telling you a fact about me. Whenever I see or hear something that makes me cringe or squirm, I get this tingling sensation in my cuticles, and it has to be bad for that to happen. But when it's really bad, it affects my toenail cuticles as well. By the time I finished reading this 5-page short story, my fingers and toes were on fire. The Blessed Affliction is a short story by Eric Wrighton and is featured in the short story collection Gothic Fantasy, Weird Horror. Phoenix is a teenage girl who is experiencing certain womanly changes, and no, I'm not talking about periods. You know how a snake sheds its skin? Well, that's pretty much it, except it's an entire layer of flesh. Writer Eric Wrighton goes into extreme detail on how her stomach bloats and her skin melts off, and he thought it was embarrassing going to CVS and Rite Aid for tampons and maxi pads. This poor girl not only literally has to shed off layers of flesh, but she needs someone to watch her in the nude. After reading up on the author's inspiration for the short story, I came to appreciate it for its Greek mythological inspiration, and more importantly, its optimistic message. It's still pretty fucking gross. At number 14, Stephen King's The Lawnmower Man and Survivor Type. For my next entry, I'm giving you 2 for 1. Stephen King himself went on to call Survivor Type the litmus test for King fans, and not without good reason. Survivor Type tells a story from the point of view of a doctor who was illegally smuggling heroin via cruise ship, only for it to sink during a storm. Being the sole survivor, the doctor seeks refuge on an isolated small island with no food. Getting desperate, and with an abundance of heroin, Dr. Richard Pine begins to eat himself. So yeah, I would definitely rank a short story about auto-cannibalism amongst any writer's most fucked up works. But for me, the one King tale that made my stomach churn and cuticles flare up was The Lawnmower Man. After a suburban dad hires a new landscaper after his previous one mowed over the family cat, he gets quite the surprise of a lifetime when his lawnmower man strips bare-ass naked, gets on all fours behind the automatic lawnmower, and eats whatever the fuck comes out from behind. Grass, dirt, a gopher, you name it. Again, this being King, nothing is left to the imagination, and he goes out of his way to gross you the fuck out. At number 13, Suffer the Children. Interesting fact, apparently author John Saul initially wanted to write a gay comedy about a rabbi, but his agent said no one would read it, and suggested that he emulate Stephen King. That's how we were blessed with Suffer the Children. The novel opens up 100 years prior with a little girl being chased by an old man, and, well, it doesn't end well. Flash forward 100 years. A family moves into an old house. A father, a drunk, a mother, and 2 little girls, one of whom is mute from past trauma. The 2 girls begin to make friends at school and are eager to show them their new secret hideaway, a ditch in the middle of the woods where they are held prisoner. Oh no, it doesn't end there. The now hostage children are only fed raw meat and are forced to reenact the abuse and molestation the 2 sisters endured, with the dead and decomposing cat in a baby outfit. Yeah, if you're thinking of reading this book, don't say I didn't warn you. At number 12, Haunted. Written by the same guy who brought us Fight Club, Chuck Palahniuk's Haunted is by far his most insane and gruesome novel. A group of aspiring authors are invited to an estate where they can just relax and work on the next great American novel. The catch is supplies are scarce and there is no heat or electricity. While the writers try to come up with an escape plan, they each begin to tell outrageous tales of all that is vulgar and grotesque. Most notably, one in which a guy severs his own manhood after slicing open the throat of a woman performing fellatio. And even more notable, guts. An odyssey into various ways a guy can pleasure himself. Spoiler alert, a guy ends up tearing out his own colon. Apparently whenever Chuck Palahniuk would read this in public, guests would pass out. Oh yeah, the authors resort to cannibalism and begin eating one of the guests while they are still alive. At number 11, Urban Gothic. When a group of white suburban teens head out to Philly to see a concert, The car breaks down in a rather dangerous neighborhood. After a group of African American teens come over to help out, and even offer to drive them to a body shop, the white suburbanites instead decide to take their chances in a dilapidated home that makes the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the Hells Have Eyes families look like the Brady Bunch. Neither the author nor the family hold any punches. Once those teens enter the home of the inbred psychopath, the book becomes a non-stop splatterfest full of carnage, mutilation, and severed limbs, all in grisly and macabre detail. At number 10, 120 Days of Sodom. If you're an avid Criterion collector like I am, then you obviously have seen Pier Paolo Pasolini's infamous 1975 film adaptation Salò. Even if you haven't seen the film, you know damn well how ungodly, disgusting, and perverse the film is. Displaying the most fucked up sexual taboos and tortures on the screen, the film doesn't hold a candle to the Marquis de Sade's notorious novel. Just when I thought it couldn't get possibly any sicker, I was wrong. The Marquis de Sade's novel, which by the way is incomplete, is a cacophony of grotesque perversion and torture that hopefully not many people can possibly think of. Just a little warning, don't read this if you're ever planning on eating. Ever. At number 9, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Published in 1967 and written by Harlan Ellison, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is one of the most soul-crushing and nihilistic works of fiction ever written. After most of humanity is destroyed, the few sole survivors are kept prisoner in a computer where they are severely tortured for all eternity. After leading an escape from the prison, in hopes of leading his fellow men to a brighter future, the narrator doesn't quite make it and is not only captured, but is turned into a gelatinous, bulbous creature with no limbs and can't possibly be destroyed, but only suffer. At number 8, A Bad Batch by Brian Evenson. For any of you who are unfortunate enough to have seen the Mortuary Collection, let alone the trailer, remember that segment with that dude who got himself pregnant? Well, that brings us to our next entry. Brian Evenson has swiftly become one of my absolute favorite writers recently, mirroring the styles of Kafka, Ligotti, and Borges. That being said, he's never afraid to enter uncharted territory. Written from the point of view of the main character, a freshly widowed man who has been suffering from severe stomach pain and bloating to the point he has to tell his boss he needs to take the day off. Instead of going to a hospital, he goes to his brother-in-law, a mortician who decides to take him to a hospital. Before leaving, the main character snatches a scalpel because you never know when you'll need one. After pulling over, the main character makes a run for it and performs an emergency C-section on himself, discovering some sort of baby alien that wraps its tail around the host's spine. Eventually, a search party of people in hazmat suits rescue him and take him to a quarantined safe haven to recover. But right next to him, his brother-in-law is now infected. Yeah, I'm a big Brian Evenson fan, but goddamn, this fucked me up. At number 7, Naked Lunch. As mentioned in my video on fucked up moments that were left out of the film, David Cronenberg's Naked Lunch left out quite a bit from the book. While yes, both the book and the film revolve around the narrator experimenting with drugs and sexuality, William S. Burroughs discusses sexual acts that would even discuss the Marquis de Sade and then some. At number 6, To Build a Fire by Jack London. Even though it isn't horror in the traditional sense, I can't help but label it as such simply due to the overwhelming sense of dread and desperation that plagues the mind of the main character, as well as the reader. Written by Call of the Wild's Jack London, To Build a Fire is a short story about a man who ventures into the Yukon Territory, determined to take advantage of the gold rush. The problem is, he is underprepared, and already at the start, the reader is made aware that the temperature is 70 degrees below. As temperatures drop and the weather worsens, Jack London goes into great detail of the effects such conditions plague on the soul's traveler. The story starts off strong, and we really begin to feel for the character and his overwhelming sense of desperation, which soon becomes unbearable and nightmare-inducing. I'm really interested in this kind of survival horror, so if any of you have any recommendations, please comment down below. At number 5, Any Corpse. Brian Evenson makes his second appearance on this list, this time with his short story Any Corpse, which is featured in his anthology A Collapse of Horses. Before I talk about the story though, this is more or less reminiscent of the novel Tender is the Flesh, and even though I read it, Any Corpse just disturbed me a tad bit more. Just to give you a heads up, allow me to read to you from the very first chapter. When she awoke, a shower of raw flesh had fallen in the field. She watched the finishers sweep their way slowly toward her, moving awkwardly in their armatures, prodding the rendered beds where they lay. What seemed fresh and unmarketed, and was large enough to grasp, they gathered. They'd smoke and preserve it, and try to sell it as provision. In a post-apocalyptic future, the human race is overrun by aliens and are being harvested like meat in a butcher shop, and an alien is on the lookout for a freshly dead cadaver for experimentation. Brian Evenson holds no bars when he writes, and this short story is one of his most disgusting and nihilistic. At number 4, we need to talk about Kevin. For those of you who are familiar with my channel, the film version of We Need to Talk About Kevin really fucked me up and was a bit of an endurance test for me to sit through. Between the jam and bread scene in here and the spaghetti in the bathtub scene in Gummo, I don't know which film made me lose my appetite more. Needless to say, after reminiscing about how much the film disturbed me, I just knew I had to read the book. I ain't gonna lie, this film is the greatest advertisement for birth control. We Need to Talk About Kevin tells the incredibly disturbing story of a kid named Kevin who was born just plain evil. It seems as though his sole purpose is to annoy and hurt people, eventually taking it out on his entire school. As unforgivable as that is, usually such people have suffered from backgrounds of severe abuse and neglect. But Kevin, for the most part, was raised in a pretty normal family, making this novel all the more disturbing, not to mention the pet hamster. At number 3, Zombies. Written by critically acclaimed author and now Spielberg basher Joyce Carol Oates, Zombies is a fictionalized account of serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer, and by now, that pretty much says it all. This novel holds nothing back in detailing Dahmer's twisted actions, including his DIY lobotomies, in hopes of creating sex zombies, hence the title. At number 2, The Troop. Written by Nick Cutter, The Troop revolves around a troop of Boy Scouts who go on a weekend-long trip on a small island not too far from town. During the trip, a practically zombified man makes his way onto the island, infected with parasitic worms which make up most of his inside, spreading the parasite amongst the troop. Not only is the idea of having parasitic worms infest your body terrifying as it is, but Nick Cutter puts you into the mind of the infected. The Troop is a fun, chilling, and gut-churning nightmarish thrill ride, which makes for a fun read that you should not read shortly after eating. For our honorable mention, Michael Crichton's Micro. Michael Crichton is hands down one of my favorite novelists of all time. Even though I don't know jack shit about science, reading Crichton's work was as close as I came to actually studying the subject. That being said, it became my goal to read all of Crichton's novels. Funny fact, I usually listen to audiobooks when I work out at the gym, and while I was listening to Micro, I would have to take breaks to step into the lobby to prevent myself from spilling my guts. The novel opens up with researchers in a jungle being sliced up by an invisible, pretty much razor wire. So imagine the opening scene of Ghost Ship, or that scene in Cube, only set in a jungle. Upon investigating, a group of scientists and researchers visit the location, only to be shrunken down and sent off to face the harrowing wilderness of the island, Oahu. Michael Crichton, being a real-life doctor and scientist, spares absolutely no details when it comes to the science of being the size of a popcorn kernel. But the part that made me want to lose my pre-workout was when one of the scientists is bitten by a bug and has his arm impregnated with maggots. In all graphic detail, it is discussed how his arm becomes swollen with the larvae as they feast on his flesh just so they can break the skin and live their lives. Yeah, pretty gross. At number 1, the most disturbing book I ever read, American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. Christian Bale's performance in American Psycho is bar none one of my personal and my all-time favorite performances in film. Unlike those Andrew Tate worshipping dweebs, the reason I love Bale's performance so much is because I have met people who walked and talked exactly like Patrick Bateman in the film. Needless to say, I didn't enjoy being in the same room as those people. In addition, I decided to read the book, and well, let's just say I never ever want to meet Bret Easton Ellis in real life. While the film is brutally graphic in every aspect of the word, the novel dials up all of that to 100. American Psycho is the single most despicable, stomach-churning, racist, and overall fucked up piece of fiction I ever laid my hands on. As shown by this list, I enjoyed horror and all that is disturbing, but this was the one piece of fiction, film, or literature that made me question, even fear, the author's sanity.